thank you so much for joining us for the second day of StartupCincy Week. We'd like to start off by thanking our sponsor for this session, Main Street Ventures. Main Street Ventures is working to become the community-funded initiative that makes entrepreneurship possible for everyone in Greater Cincinnati by supporting entrepreneurs with what they need when they need it. Capital, connections, and education. They look to support all good ideas and founders, but with a particular focus on women and minority entrepreneurs who have been historically underrepresented in the startup community. My name is Elisa Smith, and I am the Director of Corporate Innovation Services here at Centrifuge. In my role, I connect startups and corporations, and so that corporations can innovate even faster. In this content burst, we will be diving into the world of creativity and innovation. To start, let me introduce Nate Souder, Innovation Design Researcher at Fifth Third Bank. Nate is an expert at helping companies launch their technology. His ideation techniques and experience in user experience has boosted conversion, tested new concepts, streamlined workflows, and validated product market fit for big companies and many startups. Nate is part of innovation for Fifth Third Bank and an entrepreneur in residence for the EC in Dayton, Ohio. Through his work at Fifth Third, Nate contributes to the work being done at FinTech Frontier in collaboration with Centrifuge and is a startup mentor for 630.com. You can read more about Nate at natesouder.com. And now let's talk more about this session. Children's games present constraints that facilitate a child doing one thing well. The key here is that it's one thing, not 10. Innovators are often challenged with similar issues. They receive advice from multiple people, causing them to focus on too many things, rather than solving the right problem. This talk draws comparisons between children's games and activities innovators can do that are geared to help the innovator keep focus, make progress, and ultimately win the game. Let me turn it over to Nate to provide innovative insights this morning.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. It's already the end of October, isn't it? Right? The summer seemed like it flew by, and it's already fall. And it seems like my family spent the majority of the summer outside, right, at the pool. And in a snap, really, now I'm dropping my child off at daycare, right, in the mornings. Not daycare, I'm sorry. She's in preschool, right? She graduated from daycare. They had a ceremony and everything. There were robes. We literally congratulated her for her ability to age, right? No, but she was into it, so we encouraged it. And the thing that surprised me most, right, about about preschool, is all of the birthday parties, right? I mean, there's one of these a week with these kids. And with birthday parties themselves, right? It's you're not you learn growing up, right? That okay, when you have kids, these kids are going to be expensive, but they don't tell you how expensive other kids are going to be, right? It's in reality, I need to create a GoFundMe to like fund them, so to speak. But it took about a week, and my kids started asking. My daughter Leah, she's 4, started asking, well, Daddy, when is it going to be my birthday, right? And it's hard to explain 7 months to a 4-year-old, right? It's impossible. You can't do it, right? So what I decided to do was I crouched down with her, right? And I said, Leah, do you see the beautiful green leaves on the trees? She goes, well, yeah, right? I said, soon those leaves are going to change colors and they're going to fall to the ground. And she goes, and die? And I go, you betcha, right? And I said, and then it's going to snow, and it's going to get cold, and it's going to be miserable for a really long time. And it's Ohio, right? So we're going to get a week in late February where you're going to get your hopes up. It's going to get warm, and then it's going to dump a foot of snow on us. But here's the deal, Leah. Then it'll be your birthday, right? And her birthday is the week of St. Patrick's Day. And she looks at me, and I'm kind of grimacing, right, waiting for a reaction. She looks at me, and she goes, got it, right? And that was surprising, right? She got it, okay, cool. big one for dad, like walking around the house, waiting for my wife to roll her eyes, right? So anyways, a couple days go by, and I get home from work, and I walk up to the front of our house. And we have a front porch, right? And we build our front porch for the same reason anybody builds a front porch, right? So you can stay dry while you sit on it and judge your neighbors, right? But anyways, I walked up onto the front porch, and I met with just sidewalk chalk everywhere, right? I just told you, right? Like, it's a covered front porch. So to me, immediately I'm thinking like, oh man, I'm gonna have to get the hose out and hose all this down, right? Like, this is ridiculous. But it was covered in what I initially thought were stars and constellations. And I walk inside ready to, essentially ask my wife, hey, what's going on with the sidewalk chalk, right? Like, we have a sidewalk for this. And she already has a grin on her face. And I'm like, what's going on with this? And she goes, you told your daughter that it had to snow before it could be her birthday, right? And it tells us that the children are very creative, aren't they? And we applaud their creativity because it builds confidence, right? And there are plenty of resources out there about creativity and building confidence, but this talk is more centered around innovation. And I want to point out that creativity and innovation are very, very different, right? Creativity removes bounds and constraints, right? It suggests that really anything is possible and that there are no wrong answers. How much have we heard that in the workplace, right? Hey, we're going to have a brainstorm, and by the way, there's no wrong answers. Like, no, there should be. I mean, we have to pay our bills, right? But you see, we're born with creativity, right? But we lose it over time. And I've got a quote, and I want to make sure I get it right, so I wrote it down, right? So Tom Kelly, right, the author of Creative Confidence, the D School, says it turns out that creativity isn't some rare gift to be enjoyed by the lucky few. It's a natural part of human thinking and behavior. And too many of us, it can get blocked, but it can be restored, right? And that's a big deal because we've learned how to bring creativity back, and companies have started encouraging it. And it's the essence of design thinking, isn't it? Right? Companies encouraging us to be very, very creative. And what it does is it helps us be very comfortable, feeling very uncomfortable. But here's the deal. We're not born with skills to help us problem solve. These are skills that we learn over time. It's a skill that we craft with a lot of practice. And my fear is that we've done a ton of work to bring creativity back into the workplace, into startups, into big co's, right? But we're calling it innovation. And what that means, right, and what I've seen, is that while innovative ideas can be very creative, a lot of times what we end up getting is creativity that's not very innovative. It's very surface level, right? We spend 15 minutes coming up with 30 ideas that aren't possible because they don't they don't go into our current workflows. And that's not what innovation is, right? Innovation takes things that exist a lot of times, right? It solves the same problem, but we innovate on the solution to make it better, right? That can be creative, but they're two different definitions. I want to take a step back, right? I want to take a step back and talk about, I always love going to startup weeks, right? Not only because they're fun and because you get to meet a lot of new people, but I really enjoy the themes that make themselves known throughout these types of events and conferences. And I think that this one is very, very unique, right? Here at StartupCincy. And that's that we're trying to create an ecosystem, right? A lot of startup weeks, they want to support the local startups. They're trying to do good things, right? But we're trying to create an ecosystem, and we're trying to create an ecosystem that supports technology, right? And that's very easy to say, right? But it's very, very difficult to create an ecosystem. It's much like being an entrepreneur, right, or an innovator. It's like really easy to say that you are one, but it's really, really hard to be one, right? I want to take this back to children for a second and point out, essentially, right, that as children progress through early childhood, they play games that teach them skills that are necessary for innovation. We encourage this, right? So I want to run through a few of them. So essentially what I'm going to do, like none of these are going to take anyone by surprise, right? And you're going to say, "Oh, come on, Nate, like these children's games, they don't really teach us life skills." But I want you to focus on what the child has to deal with during these, right? And this isn't an exhaustive list. I'm not saying that I'm a early childhood education expert, but I do have a 4-year-old, and she's very opinionated. And I spent the last 4 years, well, number one, keeping her alive, right? But number two, observing, right? So let's start with a game and let's have fun with it. If you think of some things on your own, you're going to be right, right? So the first one, right? It was in the title of the talk, Duck, Duck, Goose, right? So let's talk about before we go into the components of Duck, Duck, Goose. We have some friends in the upper Midwest that call it Duck, Duck, Gray Duck. Have you heard this? Duck, Duck, Gray Duck. See, I even assume people from Minnesota just live in like South Canada, right? And it's called a Canadian goose, right? It's hilarious. But this isn't a talk about how the Bengals beat the Vikings in week 1, right? So we'll move on there. But let's talk about Duck, Duck, Goose, right? In Duck, Duck, Goose, you have a number of children, age doesn't matter, in a circle, and then you have one person who is it. They're the goose, right? And they walk around the circle, and they start tapping, and they're like, duck, duck, duck. And then they tap a goose, and they have to run around the circle and sit in the child spot that got up and is chasing them. And what I want to point out here is that it teaches children a couple things, right? Because they have to think ahead, right? So obviously one of those is, who are they going to pick, right? So they're going to pick someone that they think that they can beat. But it also shows that a child gets immediate feedback, right? If they don't want to be the goose and they pick someone who's faster than them, they're going to be the goose for a while, right? It's interesting, right? Let's look at another one, hopscotch, right? So in hopscotch, I'm going to take a piece of chalk, and I'm going to draw a series of boxes, and I'm going to number them, and I'm going to take a rock, and I'm going to toss it. And think about early childhood, right? Like think about really, really young kids here. Young kids that haven't developed a lot of their, I don't know if you call them gross motor skills, right? Hopping on one foot, right? It's hard, right? And so when a child starts, and they're like, okay, I have to decide actually what foot I'm going to start with, right? Like as adults, we don't really think about that. We just go, right? We can hop on either foot, really. But a child has to plan a course of action, because if they don't, they're going to get stumped, and then they're going to fall, and then they're going to have to start over, right? I thought that was great. The next one is Simon Says. I think Simon Says is interesting, because when you get a group of children, no matter how young they are, no matter how hard it is to keep their focus, they instantly become competitive because they don't want to be the one that does something wrong. Isn't that true? Isn't that true in the workplace? We don't want to be the one that does something wrong. And so we just try to follow direction. It's fascinating, right? It's paying attention as well. Musical chairs. This is really one of my most favorite ones, right? So in musical chairs, you have, a lineup of chairs either in a circle, right, or in a rectangle. And what you might be thinking is that musical chairs teaches us how to be fast. But I don't actually think that that's true, is it? Musical chairs teaches us to anticipate. And let's understand why, right? Because I can control myself right next to this chair. I can walk really, really slow, and I can take a giant step and walk really, really slow. So it's really not about speed, as it is about positioning. We're going to come back to that one, because I think that was really, really important. But there's an aspect of musical chairs that a person can't control, right? And that's the person controlling the music. And children have to think about that, and they have to anticipate where they're going to be when the music stops. I think that's awesome. And lastly, hide and seek, right? So we'll stop here. Hide and seek is interesting because when you think about a course, let's say you in your neighbor's backyard and a number of children, right? Children are going to look for hiding spots that provide advantages. And if they don't, they'll start doing it really quick, right? Not too traveled areas, right? Not high foot traffic. Maybe it'll be shaded, right? A little bit darker than others. But the more and more they play the same course, don't they adapt, right? They start to notice the hiding places that are most used or that are most visited by the person seeking. And they learn to choose different places that haven't been visited yet. Isn't that interesting when we start thinking about companies? I'd like to suggest that our ability to innovate is very, very similar, right? But I think that our skills have gotten pretty rusty. And in some cases, we've replaced them with bad habits, right? Here's one. Too often we hear the phrase, it's just an idea until someone executes. I'm going to venture to say that that's probably said by someone who has never actually executed before, because we actually know that there's a lot more involved in this, right? So I want to take the rest of the time that I have and talk about some ways that we can start to overcome this, right? And I'd like to suggest there are 4 really powerful elements of innovation. And together they form an acronym. And I know you're like, oh, thank God, right? Am I going to get through another conference and not have to learn 5 new acronyms that are going to teach me how to be an adult, right? So I've got one for you as well. And it spells the word CAPE, right? And it's so C-A-P-E. And it's concentration, anticipation, preparation, and then execution, right? We're going to take another step back just real quick and talk about why I chose that word, right? And the reason is because entrepreneurs are sometimes called superheroes, aren't they? And at first I was like, oh, come on, really? Little imposter syndrome maybe, right? But like, really? Can we make this work? But as I started to dig into it a little bit more and I looked at what an entrepreneur and an innovator really is, and then I looked at what a superhero is, right? So let's start with a superhero. A superhero takes risks for the betterment of what they think society needs, right? They put themselves out there and they do what's right. Oftentimes at the detriment of their own safety in many cases, right? Their own well-being. And they do it without thinking because they know it's right. When you think about innovators and you think about entrepreneurs, isn't it true, right? Especially successful ones, you're like, wow, they make this look so easy, right? But the reality is they're willing to take unnecessary risks for the betterment of the people that they care about and of the lives that they want to change. And that really is something that they should be called superheroes in that instance. So let's break it down, right? So C, concentration. Isn't this something that we encourage in our kids, right? Don't we encourage them to concentrate? Like we ask them to focus on very singular tasks, and we reward that, right? Tie your shoes, eat your dinner, make your bed, brush your teeth. Very singular tasks. But in the business world, we've become accustomed to losing focus or focusing on too many things because we almost need to broaden our circle to gain more attention if we think we're going to get this thing through. But big ideas tend to not be very innovative, right? Because they're hard to implement. If you want to implement something, it needs to be something very concentrated. And so what you end up seeing with startups that end up being successful, right, is they solve a real problem. They're not a culmination of 50 features because people told them that they would use it if they did it. It's very interesting. And another aspect that I want to add on to this is how we give and receive feedback. Because there's 2 different types of feedback, isn't there? Yeah? There's advice and there's guidance, right? We're very quick to give our children advice, aren't we? Aren't we? But do you know what advice is? Advice is you need to change something. Let me give you some advice. You need to change something, right? Guidance is what you tell someone when you still want them to make their own decision, isn't it? Have you thought about doing this? Have you considered what would happen if? Right? I think oftentimes as mentors or as companies, we're very quick to offer advice to startups and innovators, aren't we? We're very quick to tell them that they need to change something, and if they do, then we think they'd have a better chance. But oftentimes we have very little context. We don't have nearly as much context as the innovator does as to why they're making decisions. So what if we became better at giving guidance like good parents do in their children? Well, let's move on. So A, anticipation, right? We talked about musical chairs. I think that's a great way to look at anticipation. We need to do a better job of working to understand what's coming next, right? When you think about innovation, and you think about the way companies anticipate what is coming next, if you only ask your customers what they want, you'll always be one step behind, won't you? Because if you do what they ask you to do and you launch it, then all of a sudden they'll be asking for something else. So how do we anticipate better? And I think the way that we do that is we stop focusing so much on what people tell us, because if it's true innovation, they've probably never seen this before, right? And we base our innovative ideas not on what people tell us through positive reinforcement, we're just telling you that they hate your idea, right? Which is what happens. And we start basing it on data that currently exists, right? It's all out there. Because remember what I said, right? Innovation isn't typically, right, taking a brand new idea to society that doesn't exist and just introducing it, right? It takes something that exists, right? It takes something that someone is currently doing, a job that is being accomplished, and you're providing a new way of doing that. And data should exist that proves that should be innovated on, right? So how do we anticipate and solve that type of problem? Preparation. I like this one a lot, right? There are three types of innovators, just three, right? The first is the person who is the innovator who really takes a step back when they're thinking about innovating or they're thinking about becoming an entrepreneur. And they want to make sure that they are ready to do this, right? They take a long time in making sure in themselves that they're ready to take that leap toward innovation, right? And I call it they're waiting to get ready. So they're okay, all right, I'm ready, right? I'm ready. I'm going to start this. I'm going to do this. We need to do this, right? I think I'm ready. Are you ready? I'm ready. All right, let's go. And once they aim and once they fire, they end up being very grounded in what they want to accomplish, but it just takes them a long time to actually take that first step. The second type is a person that is always ready, right? Let's do this, right? But they end up aiming to make sure that they're solving essentially the right problem, but they tend to aim too long, right? And so sometimes this gets masked as, if you've heard founder syndrome or inventor syndrome, right? Where you invent a product that's like ready to go to market, but you're afraid to release it because you're afraid of what people will think of it, right? Or you see other competition that's out there, and they're releasing something that has maybe something more than yours does, and you think, oh man, okay, now I've got to leapfrog them before I can release my product, and then you end up never actually launching it, right? But once they do launch it, they learn very, very quickly how to adapt. They just need to get it out there. And then there's the third type. Another type that just fires. Wait, hang on, should we have aimed, right? Right? They fire before they're ready, but the excuse that they typically give is, well, at least I've got a product out there, and I'm learning from it, right? Because then they can always adapt. When I think about preparation, it's the last step before execution, isn't it? Right? Rarely does someone come up with an idea and execute completely on it by themselves, right? It's the same thing in raising a child, isn't it? It takes a village. And my call is for individuals, if you can identify who you are, which type of the three, to surround yourself with people that are not like you, because it'll make you better. And isn't Centrifuge that? Isn't that interesting? Centrifuge is able to come alongside companies, no matter what stage they're in, and provide value, right? You all know that I'm very heavily involved. I'm passionate about FinTech Frontier. And I think that this is key because we have a pitch competition in 2 days, right? We're excited about it. But a pitch competition doesn't make a startup successful, does it? It helps. But we're serving different staged startups. Some of them are totally idea stage, right? I have a dream. I have a dream stage. Some of them have started development, and maybe the product's developed, but they don't have a lot of customers yet. And then others are revenue stage companies that need the partnerships, the acquisitions, customers, et cetera. How great is it that we have an organization that's able to meet you where you are and surround you with individuals to help you in the areas where you need help, right? Isn't that what FinTech Frontier is? And finally, execution. I think if you do the first 3 steps well, execution becomes the most straightforward, doesn't it? Right? It's the part that catches the most people off guard. Because when you're ready to execute, oftentimes there are lapses in how we communicate with people that are different than us. But it becomes the most straightforward if you prepare well. And I hope that you do it. And I hope that you take the leap. And if you're not connected with Centrifuge and you're not connected with an ESP, an entrepreneurial services provider, I hope that you get in touch with one. And if you don't know how to, I'm really easy to get a hold of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nate. That was really, really awesome. It was wonderful food for thought, and it was great to see the link and hear about the link to children's games. So next, I'm going to introduce the next session. This session is Leveraging Your Brand Marketing Inspiration Sessions. To start, let me introduce Nathan Hendricks, who is the Chief Creative Officer at LPK. As Chief Creative Officer at LPK, Nathan brings nearly 3 decades of experience across virtually every category, merging diverse disciplines to approach brands with innovative methodologies such as design thinking. He has developed winning creative for a long and varied roster of clients, including Gillette, Titleist, Pringles, Beam Suntory, AB InBev, Herbal Essence, Olay, and Coleman. In every effort, Nathan challenges his team to uphold LPK's philosophy that every brand should make a powerful and positive difference for the people it serves. A candid cultural commentator, he's never afraid to tell it like it is. His industry insights and design methodologies have been quoted in publications like Fast Company, Quartz, Ad Age, DMI, How Magazine, and UX Magazine, among others. Nathan holds a bachelor's degree in industrial design from The Ohio State University, where he majored in visual communications and cultivated an affection for industrial beer. I will now turn it over to Nathan to share his words of wisdom on brand building.
Hi, thanks. So I've got a burst. This is a short burst. I guess one thing that I would say is, based on the slide that you see before you, I'm not going to be talking about brand purpose. Brand purposes are great if you use them. I just happen to find that most of our clients, over time, stop using them. Especially if the numbers go south or soft, they're just like, where's my purpose? The reason the slide is up is because it's actually the name of a game that I designed for myself back, call it in the early part of the last decade, so the teens of this century. And What's Your Purpose is a game that goes like this. You drive to work, and you listen to the news, and you listen for the latest corporate scandal. And then when you get to work, you Google that corporation's purpose and compare and contrast. It's a very cynical game, but it was kind of fun. I collected maybe 30 or 40 of these examples over the course of a year, and then I just kind of got bored. It became repetitive. But I thought just for fun, I would resurrect, call it my top 4, and share them with you today. So number 1 is Merck. So this is the CEO of Merck, jolly guy. Merck, as you may recall, marketed a drug called Vioxx. Vioxx was a pain reliever. It also killed people. The FDA found that it killed like 55,000 people actually, before they took it off the market. And you may see that their purpose is to increase the quality or enhance the quality of life of people and families all around the world. This is the CEO of Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, as you may remember, bilked their customers out of millions, tens of millions of dollars over the course of a few years. They're about helping people succeed financially. They did get a fine for this, like $2.5 million, which is like a parking ticket. And this is the CEO of Mylan. Mylan was a company that bought the EpiPen. And after they bought the EpiPen, they raised the price from $50 to $600, effectively putting a life-saving device out of reach of most American families. And so you can see they're about making sure that healthcare solutions are available to as many people as possible. And I thought I'd provide a more modern version of this game for you today. So this is the king of the metaverse, and as you know, Zuckerberg's really about bringing people together. So why am I torturing you with this incredibly cynical game? Well, there's 2 reasons. One is I view this kind of the time of the teens in the world of brand as like peak bullshit, right? And the good news about whenever we get into peak bullshit in any category is that people start to notice. So the good news is that consumers now know that if you're telling me that you're going to save the world with your insurance product or your marketing software is going to change everything, they're going to roll their eyes. Because think about it, if every single one of these purposes was delivered upon, things would be amazing. We'd be just killing it, right? So the good news is we've passed peak bullshit. It's almost over. It's still kind of with us, but it's almost over. And I have a high hope that this era will be replaced by what I would call the era of insanity, like the good kind of insanity, the founder's insanity. So this is the founders of Tom's Shoes, by the way. So what do I mean by founders insanity? So about the same time that brands were kind of losing their minds about becoming purpose-driven, I was working with a group of really smart, really reasonable people trying to kind of update and create a really smart and really reasonable brand. And by the way, smart and reasonable is code for boring. And for whatever reason, these people were really interested in Coco Chanel. They were inspired by Coco Chanel. And so it was kind of mind-blowing because I'm like, dispositionally, these people were a million miles away from Coco Chanel. And if you think about Coco Chanel, she was obsessed with art, she was obsessed with fashion, and she was on a mission to bring fashion from kind of the Gilded Age into the modernity of the 20th century. And thinking about her from a branding point of view, like Coco Chanel did not have a brand pyramid. She did not have a stated brand purpose. She was the pyramid. She was the purpose. And I started thinking about more contemporary versions of this. Steve Jobs was alive at the time. And how these different founders were putting an imprint on the outward-facing expression of their brands. And at the time, Patagonia was kind of emerging as this brand darling, as a purpose-driven company. But I was really more interested in the impact that its founder had on the way that it went to market. And so there are two images on the screen right now. One of them is the founder of Patagonia. The other one is not the founder of Columbia. And I think you can tell simply by looking at these two people which one is which. So why am I obsessed with this? I'm obsessed with this because consumers care. Customers care. Customers notice. I've always been really astounded and very interested in how compelling a founder is to consumers. So even across this gigantic commercial divide, the transaction that happens between a customer and a founder or a founder's organization, you can tell, can't you, that the people on the other end of this transaction are obsessed or insane in a way that's probably unhealthy about the product and service that they are delivering for you. And I feel like what I've witnessed over the course of my career is that founder brands often are the brands that we care the most about, we can't live without, we attach our identity to, and we find a lot of resonance with, as opposed to simply reason and making sense. So, if that's the key, how do you do it? Like, even if you're not a founder, how do you create founder's insanity? How do you create a brand that engenders that? So we have a couple thoughts on this. So one thing that we would say is today's brands need to resonate beyond reason. And there are two keys that we want to establish from day one when we're working on a brand. One is that they are enduring, meaning that they, at their core, are based upon a powerful, universal human truth. The kind of truth that is compelling to you today, is compelling to people in the past, and will be compelling to people long into the future, enduring. So if you think about, like if you're about helping people rear their children, or helping people feel secure, or helping people feel prestige, better than everybody else, these are core human desires that you need to kind of understand, build your brand around, define, and then your next challenge is to find the next expression of that in the emergent culture. So as a parent, what is the next way that people are parenting their children in an ever-changing world? And the way that we look at this is by paying attention to the brand, the consumer or the customer, the category and the culture. And we will often marry these up. So under enduring, we're interested in what the brand stands for, what the brand cares about, and what the consumer cares about. What's the overlap there? And we're also interested in the category and how it's impacted by the culture over time. Once we understand that, we have a better chance of creating one of these Founders Insanity brands. So just to unpack enduring and emergent a little bit. So say you are marketing a bourbon brand. Bourbon's fun. We want to connect people to that brand, and we find that there are three main ways to do that. We want to connect with the head, heart, and gut of the people that we're looking to serve. So if you think about the head, that is the rational benefits that you offer. So in the context of whiskey, it's like aging, provenance. The heart piece is the values that you share with your customer as a brand. So whether it's, whether you're sustainable, whether you're philanthropic, your brand character. And those two are really easy to understand. All you have to do is talk to consumers or customers, do your research, but that's really only going to give you 2/3 of the picture. The real key is understanding the gut. We know that most decisions are made from a primal place. And so it's very important that you understand a model of human motivation. And there are a number of them out there that will help you understand the gut piece. We use a model that's based on 16 hardwired desires, and it allows us to marry up what a brand stands for with what people actually want from their lives. So that's enduring. Once you've defined that, crystallized that, the goal is to take it into the emergent. So again, emergent is really where the culture and the category intersect. Technically, the category is a subset of the culture. Your category is you and your competitors. And it's important to know that obviously all of this, the category, the culture, your brand and people within it, the culture are sailing through a stream of change. Change is impacting our culture at a dizzying rate every single day, and it has an impact on how the category performs, how it behaves. And so at LPK, we keep track of this with trends people, and they classify these changes. They call them either emergent, mainstreaming, or residual. And so it's obvious, most of the category is going to want to play in the mainstreaming place. The brands that are reasonable, that want to make sense, play it safe, they play in the mainstreaming space. But what we found is the brands that push into the emergent. Now, you don't have to be at the bleeding edge, but you need to be in that emergent zone, because face it, like no one's talking about Buick today. Everybody's talking about Tesla today. Tesla is an emergent car company. So when you push into that emergent space, you realize a number of benefits. Number one, you go where the attention gathers, you become part of the category conversation, you by definition lose competitors, and you're gonna make the most of your marketing cash. So ultimately, you're gonna become a brand that people care about, they can't live without, they attach their identity to, and find residence within. So if you are a founder, lean into the insanity, love it, crystallize it. If you're not a founder, replicate it by tapping into the enduring and the emergent. That's my burst. I'm Nathan Hendricks. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Nathan. That was awesome. I love it. Love the 2 E's, enduring and emergent. That's really, really easy to understand and remember. Thank you. So next, let me introduce Rebecca Arbana, President and Chief Truth Teller of Brand True. Rebecca is a brand strategist and strategic namer. Her company, Brand True, is dedicated to helping brands express their unique, deep truths in ways that help them stand out and win. Some of her previous clients include Kraft, Kellogg, Brown-Forman, Eli Lilly, MasterCard, Scotts, Keurig, Mars, Wrigley, Dole, Kroger, and Procter & Gamble. Rebecca will be sharing her insights in her talk, The Trail of Breadcrumbs, Branding for Startups.
Thank you, Elisa. You're welcome. Mike, thank you, Elisa. Is this on? Is this working? Okay. So, Have you guys heard the one about the old man that went for a walk and found a talking frog? Do you know it? Do you know it? It's okay if you know it. It's okay if you don't. I'm not going to tell it, but I will come back and explain why I mentioned it. So thank you for that introduction. I've been working in brand strategy for almost 25 years. And I've been working mostly volunteering with startups for 6 or 7. So I have a lot of ideas, a lot of things I could talk about, and I have 10 minutes. So I had to give it some time, some thinking time, to distill down to what's most important. And that's actually one of the biggest points I want to share with you. Branding is a lot of things, but one thing that I want you to think about that I think is lacking often in the startup space is that branding is about figuring out that which is most important and not talking about all the things, but talking about the most meaningful things. So with that, I have just a few things I want to talk to you about and 3 main principles, more or less. First, I want to talk a little bit more about branding because it's often misunderstood. What I want to tell you about branding is that brands, especially from your perspective, if you're a founder, if you're a brand owner, are incredibly complex. There's so many product details and facts and story and history and experience people have with the brand and their perception and various communications. Think of it as an overstuffed briefcase. There's a lot of things inside the briefcase. That's the brand. Branding is what does the outside of the briefcase need to look at for people to hold it and understand it? And what I like most about this metaphor is that a briefcase has a handle. And you want to think about having a handle, and you want to think about the outside of the briefcase, and try not to think about all of the insides of the briefcase. That's the process of distillation that I want to talk to you about. So the handle, great, that's okay. The handle is an attention-getting device. And what I mean by attention-getting device is, have you ever seen a talk where people start with a joke, like maybe a story about a talking frog? If you take a public speaking class, you're often told to start with an attention-getting device. And just as that's true for public speaking, it struck me a long time ago that that's true for brands, that you have to think about what's that thing that you use to grab people. And we tend to think about all the things that we can say. We tend to think about the insides of the briefcase. And I think we've all sat through pitches where people are saying all the things they can think of because I know all these things, and someone might have a question or an objection or a concern, and so I'm just going to keep talking and I'm going to say them all. Those are typically, while very information-packed, perhaps not fascinating to receive. An attention-getting device, like your little joke, says to people, what's happening next? That's interesting. Now I'm listening. And so I want you to think about your attention-getting device. I have a lot of metaphors for this. I was thinking about, as I drove over, the tip of the spear. You know, what's the pointy part of the spear, and then what comes next and next? And the thrust that's behind that spear, how are you going to get in with your story? Because if you turn the spear sideways, long ways, here, I'll do it with this. If you come at people like this, that's a defensive move. That, the spear, is an offensive move, and that's how I would like you to think about your marketing. Okay, your branding. Okay, so how do you do that? So if the first principle is attention-getting device, have an attention-getting device, I would also say that that is usually, not always, but usually your brand's name. There's lots of different strategies that you can use for naming. A name can be very descriptive and kind of prosaic. It can be very evocative and poetic. And depending on your strategy, you know, one or the other one is not more valid than the other, except in how it aligns with your strategy. But always, that name should grab attention, preferably. And if it's not a name that grabs attention, God damn it, what are you doing next to grab attention, right? What is the tip of your spear? So having said that, the attention-getting device, what comes next? That's the second principle I want to share with you. And that's the idea of laying a trail of breadcrumbs. So again, we've all seen these presentations that are a little bit verbaria, you know, coming at you with a lot. But the best presentations, the best branding in both cases, are where there's a trail of breadcrumbs, breadcrumb, 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 to lead you into the forest, to take attention and then pull the attention along and not just squander it. So, there's no rules in branding or in any of these communications, and yet there are maybe a couple things I've learned that you could consider for a framework. And so the thing I would say is that you should focus very much on what you offer and why it matters to people. And in the trail of breadcrumbs, it comes later to talk about things like how you deliver it or who you are that makes you the best to deliver it. These are very important and valid things to share, but perhaps not right all at once. Those things can come later. So a side note on elevator pitches, because in this context, elevator pitches are so important. We know that they're supposed to be very, very short, and yet I have almost never seen one that wasn't too long. So thinking about this idea of frameworks, that there are no rules, but here's a potential shortcut, a framework. Think about, for your first breadcrumb, as you're talking about your brand, as you're thinking about how you'll articulate your brand, think about this formula, your name, which is hopefully an attention-getting device, a name that disrupts, catches attention. Then, a generic descriptor, a 2 to 5 word statement of what your brand is. We have all sat through pitches where at the end of them, we're still wondering, what is on offer here? What do they do? And so there's a lot of magic in having a 2 to 5 word descriptor. If you think about, for example, Tide. Brian McCleary's sitting there, so I thought of Tide. Tide is not named Tide. Tide is named Tide laundry detergent. 2-word descriptor that tells you what it is. For the love of God, come up with a 2 to 5 word descriptor of what you do and use that immediately after your name, and that's your second breadcrumb. That brings people in. And then the third part of this is you probably want a tagline to articulate what it is that people get when they get what you offer. And so I have an example that I think will make this make more sense. Imagine about 20 years ago, the launch of a new company, and they said, we're PayPal, an online payments system that creates a safer, easier way to pay. We're PayPal. That's an attention-getting device. It's a pretty good name. PayPal. I think I know more or less what they're doing. It's kind of cute. It's got the 2 Ps. I want to hear more. I'm leaning in when I hear that name. Great. An online payment system, just 3 words, but I kind of know what it is. You can imagine that the people behind that brand had a lot of technical savvy and were able to talk about how can we make payments online safely. Well, it's with this technical giga doohickey, clearly I don't know how to talk those talks, but they surely did. And this is all the years of experience we have. No, that comes later. Online payment system, great. But then the emotional payoff creates a safer, easier way to pay. Why should I care? Start there, and then the rest of the breadcrumbs flow more easily, logically, and with people hanging on the edge of their seat to hear about it. Yeah? So the third principle that I wanted to share with you is to always make things easier for your audience. And that seems like a truism. Well, sure. But making things easier for your audience is almost always quite difficult for you. Many founders in technological spaces are coming with this great expertise, like no doubt the PayPal founders did, where they speak a different language. And in these contexts, they feel like it's important to speak that different language to show their expertise. And so what I would exhort you to do is to cut that shit out. Speak in plain English. And only when the breadcrumbs are at the place where it's necessary to establish your expertise or your credibility do you lean on that expertise. First, you have to be human, and you have to be crystal clear. Doing that, making things easier for your audience, that is harder for you typically, because it means making yourself vulnerable to run things by a ton of people and to take on board what they tell you if they tell you that it's not clear. It's to have enough confidence in your expertise to shed the trappings of your expertise and to simply show up at that deep meaning level. I was very taken by Nathan's comments when he talked about the founder's insanity. I think that we see so many founders that have this insanity and they think they need to bury it into their credibility, under their credibility, but it's the opposite completely. Pull that out, find the way, make yourself vulnerable in that way, and that's how you will inspire. And so I'll close with a quote from that brilliant genius of many things, not typically branding, Albert Einstein. He said, make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. That's what I've learned is the most important thing about branding and about branding in the startup context that I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was awesome. I really enjoyed that. Loved hearing about breadcrumbs and how that relates to branding. Very, very, very relevant to everything that we're doing here. Okay, so for our next session, I'm going to introduce Brian McCleary. Brian has spent his career creating ideas and turning them into game-changing campaigns, messages, and events for companies such as P&G, for brands such as Pampers and Crest, for nonprofit organizations such as UNICEF and United Way, and for iconic leaders such as U.S. Senator and American astronaut John Glenn. Today, Brian is going to share the surprising things startups should know about creativity in his talk, The Creative Bill of Rights.
Thank you very much. And it's great to be here, and it's a tough act to follow after Rebecca. She was really amazing and inspiring. So, again, I'm Brian McCleary, and I'm here to present to you today your Creativity Bill of Rights. And this is going to be 8 simple tips on how to boost your creativity in your work and in your life. As I was getting ready for today, I thought to myself, are people in startups more creative than people in big companies? So I did a little bit of research, and I found that the answer to that was yes. People in startups and entrepreneurs are more creative than people in big companies. So congratulations. But there was a caveat. There was a chicken and the egg dilemma that basically said it was unclear whether people in startups were more creative or whether being in a startup made them more creative. So all of the things that you have to go through in your daily lives as an entrepreneur. But the common denominator with creativity is the idea that creative people are risk takers. And so taking that leap into the entrepreneurial world and then dealing with all of the confusion and chaos and having to imagine and pivot and change your route on the way to bringing your product to market. So risk-taking is a big part of creativity. So what is creativity? There's many definitions, but the one that I found that I thought made the most sense was by an economist named Theodore Levitt. And the definition he came up with is creativity is thinking about new things. Innovation is about doing new things. And I really like this definition because big ideas, I think somebody kind of alluded to this, big ideas are a dime a dozen without being able to execute and without being able to innovate. Or as Albert Einstein said, invention is 1 part inspiration, 1 part perspiration, or 99% perspiration, something I'm sure all of you can identify with. So when you think about creativity, what's the mindset that you should have? Is this a nice to have or a business imperative? This leads us to our first Bill of Rights, our first right. You have the right to a creativity culture. And what do I mean by this? Again, I ask the question, is creativity a must-have or is it a business imperative? I'm not going to read this, but this is basically firms identifying themselves as creative. Let's take a look. Okay? The next is firms that are not creative. Okay. Let's take a look at that. So again, the idea here is that there is a comparative advantage to creativity. There is a competitive advantage. It builds brands. It helps you innovate. So, you've decided that creativity is going to be part of your culture. I'm sure that the next step would be to rush headfirst into coming up with that big idea. I'm here to say the second Bill of Rights is that's wrong. You have the right to go slow. And what do I mean by this? And again, we go to Albert Einstein, and I'm not going to read this quote, but I'm going to let you read it and absorb it because it's that important. Okay, so what are we talking about here? I'm sure you guys know a little bit about design thinking, and the idea with this quote, the way Einstein defines it, is don't rush into the brainstorm, the famous, vaunted brainstorm. Take the time. And as design thinking articulates it, think about the problem to be solved, the job to be done, and what is that consumer pain point that you're really trying to solve? With Tide, the Tide detergent, it cleans. With PayPal, it gives you instant ease of use. What is it that is solving that consumer pain point? So again, take the time up front. So once you've decided, all right, I've defined the problem, I've spent my 55 minutes, I'm ready to solve it, what is the next step in the process? I imagine you might think it's to come up with something totally original. So the next Bill of Rights is just the opposite. You have the right to not be original. And what do we mean by this? Let's go to Steve Jobs. Creativity is just connecting things. I really like this. Many people consider the wheel to be the greatest invention of all time. It was invented 2,000 years ago by Mesopotamians, interestingly enough, as part of pottery making. It wasn't actually until 300 years later that someone had the idea, let's take that and put it on a chariot. And so transportation was born as we know it, and we were on our way. Another example, more modern, peanut butter cups. So there was a commercial kind of a long time ago that basically talked about the creative process that led to the peanut butter cup. And that was, there was a person walking down the street with chocolate, a person walking down the street with peanut butter. They collided, and the peanut butter person said to the chocolate person, hey, you got chocolate in my peanut butter. And vice versa, the peanut butter said, you got chocolate, or the chocolate person said, you've got peanut butter in my chocolate. So peanut butter cups were born. So another way I like to think about this quote is look for peanut butter cup innovation. Okay, so our next right in our Creativity Bill of Rights is you have the right to not start with a blank canvas. And why do I say this? Again, it's part of this idea of organizing your thinking. And the idea, start with a blank canvas, gets thrown around all the time. And I worked at P&G, as you mentioned, and one thing that we would often tell our agencies when they would go off and create was, we're going to give you a blank canvas. We don't want you to have any restrictions. We want you to come back to us with the biggest ideas possible. And most of the time when we did that, that would really fail. And so again, we go back to the idea that constraints can be good. They can channel you in the right direction. Start again with the job to be done, the problem to be solved, and the consumer pain point that you want to alleviate. Another way to think about this is a problem well defined is a problem well solved. Okay, so once you've got this blank canvas, you think, all right, we're going to do the brainstorm. We're going to get the people together. And this is always a dangerous thing because sometimes the brainstorm is a good technique, other times it's not. But you're going to go ahead and do it. The next right you have you have the right to lose the sticky pads, the Post-it notes. Why do I say this? I say this because there's a dynamic in brainstorming sessions that I'm sure you've seen and observed and been part of. Everybody's writing on the Post-it notes. They're flying around, people are yelling, They're talking about their big ideas, they're talking over one another, they're putting things on the board, they're categorizing, they're arguing over what buckets, to identify as, where does each sticky pad go, that sort of thing. And you have, chaos. And you have the typical characters in a brainstorm. So you have the dominator, the person who just can't, resist leading everything. You have the naysayer, again, that person that's like, oh, that'll never work. We don't have the budget. We can't execute that. Then you have perhaps the most important person of all, and that is the introvert. And we've all heard about the power of introverts. They're the people who may have the most brilliant idea of all, but can't get a word in edgewise. So how do you avoid this dynamic? One technique is brain writing. And I'm sure you guys have heard about this, but I really like it because what it is, you take a piece of paper, you write an idea on it, and then you pass it to the next person who then builds on it and so forth and so on. So if you have 7 people, you have 7 pieces of paper, and at the end of the day, you have 7 great pieces of work that have been built on by everybody in the brainstorm. So let's go to some science, brain writing versus brainstorming. 2 groups were sent out, and the assignment was to develop alternative uses for paper clips. So as many uses as you could possibly come up with. So again, one group used the brainstorming method, one group used the brain writing method. I'm not going to read this, but you're going to see that the group that did the brain writing had 48% more ideas than the group that did the brainstorming. So very interesting. So you've done you're thinking about the brainstorming, you've identified the problem, you've got a great agenda, then you want to bring in the experts, right? Wrong. You have the right to bring in the generalists. Now, why do I say that? Think back 150 years ago. If you had gotten people together and said, the right experts, and said, all right, we're going to develop a flying machine, who might the experts have been? Hot air balloonists. They would be the logical people that you would want to have, involved. But instead, as we know, it was 2 bicycle makers who thought about things differently and changed the game forever. I had a really interesting brainstorm that I led a couple days ago in New York, and I pulled together a very eclectic group of people. And so they included everybody from a toy maker to a travel and health writer. And we really synthesized a lot of great ideas and came out with something that I think is going to be executable. But again, 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. So how do you ensure coming out of a brainstorm that creativity doesn't become something that's a one-off or something that's once a quarter or at an off-site, but something that can stand the test of time? The next Bill of Rights is you have the right to be externally focused. So what do I mean by this? And I think somebody else had a similar comment. You don't come up with big ideas by getting consumers in a room and asking them what product they want. As Steve Jobs said, what you do is you get consumers and bring to them products that they need. So again, that's the way to think about external focus. As Henry Ford said, if I had asked consumers how we could have more transportation and faster transportation, they would have said, we need a faster horse. So again, think about this and think about external focus as being keeping your finger on the pulse, collecting cool, eclectic groups of people. So whether it's an informal kitchen cabinet that you pull together or whether it's a formal advisory board, think about that and look at trends inside your industry and outside your industry. So that brings us to our final Bill of Rights. So you're exhausted, you can't get out of bed almost, and you feel like you're out of creative ideas. What do? This is our final right. You have the right to take a walk. And why do I say this? Again, the science tells us walking can boost creative output by 60%. So simple, yet so profound. So those are your Creativity Bill of Rights. I've really enjoyed bringing these to you. So my advice is, if you remember nothing else from today, remember this slide. Go out and take a walk, or better yet, find me or give me a call. We'll take a walk together, and there's no telling what we'll come up with. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for sharing the Creativity Bill of Rights. I would love to see those posted somewhere, just so we can always remember. To close out our inspiration sessions, let me introduce Melis Adogan, founder of Ruya Coffee and senior brand manager at Procter & Gamble. Melis created the Ruya Coffee Company, meaning dream in Turkish. As a founder, she wants to give immigrants and locals the opportunity to rewrite their own stories through conversations told over Turkish coffee. Since its inception, Ruya has been recognized with the 2021 Good Food Award for their chocolate and by the Food Network in several online publications. Let me turn it over to Melis to share her story. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. So this is all pretty new to me because I'm no longer with Procter & Gamble, so I'm fully in the startup scene. As of October 1st, I have spread my wings from the corporate world and have taken on Ruya full time. But you know what? I'm still recovering from the recruitment process at Procter & Gamble. It's pretty intensive. And a little bit about that is actually, in the interview process, a very common question that people ask is, what's your passion? And I'm a very passionate person about Ruya. But when it came to selling myself to Procter & Gamble, I lied. I'm not gonna lie, I did lie. So they said, what are you passionate about? And I was like, okay, so how do I connect the dots with Procter & Gamble? And they love a good personal story, right? So I was like, the real reason I'm in America is because of Procter & Gamble. Like, the only person my parents knew at the time coming from Turkey was my uncle who worked for Procter & Gamble. So I was like, I feel this need to work for Procter & Gamble because America has granted me so many opportunities, and the life I have here is really nothing like it would be in Turkey, especially as a woman and person who wants to be an entrepreneur. And so they were like, wow, yeah. And a lot of the conversations also stemmed from, my immigrant parents talking about the fluctuating, Turkish lira and, how that impacts, our well-being in America. And when we go back to Turkey, there's this stark contrast between, I go back to Turkey every summer growing up and pick up hazelnuts on my family's hazelnut farm versus coming back to America and having a very privileged life. And so what I want to talk about is branding and innovation, right? I woke up this morning and I was like, wait, what's the topic I'm supposed to talk about? And so branding and innovation, to me, that's all about storytelling. And when I created Ruya, I didn't expect it to turn into a company. I didn't expect it to have an LLC. I didn't even expect it to be like this brand. Ruya started as a passion project. It started as a platform for me to tell my story and for me to connect with other people who also had immigrant stories. And so through the storytelling process, I was able to create a community. And this community saw themselves within my immigrant story, and they felt empowered to tell their own stories. And so how were all these stories told? It was actually through the fortune-telling process. And it's weird because we're living in these super uncertain times, and fortune-telling became this huge thing. I'm a Leo, and so, if you know your moon rising or sun rising, I don't know, your horoscope, this also became like a very trending thing during COVID. And so over the course of these, 2 to 3 years that I've been doing Ruya and seeing fortune-telling and horoscopes and seeing this trend happening, the chief creative officer of LPK was talking about being in that emergent space, right? Being in that emergent space of the conversation and putting your brand in that. And I saw this opportunity for Ruya to play in that. And so what ended up happening is my life is all about social media, being a millennial. I think I'm the youngest speaker here, so my mom's not here. Usually my mom's here doing the fortune tellings, and she comes to all my speeches and video records it, but she's not here. So if you ever come to a fortune telling process, you'll see Mama Ruya. But anyways, in the social media sphere, I wanted to create these online storytelling platforms, but then also IRL, in real life connections. So what would happen is, I'll just walk you guys through the process. You enter a shop that I've transformed into the space as if you've walked into my grandmother's living room. You sit on something like a really fine Turkish rug with an ottoman there and a low table, similar to like how I would sit at my grandma's house. I usually like to sit on the floor. And my mom brews you Turkish coffee. She brings it over. And Turkish coffee is a 500-year-old tradition. So something that has withstood the so many years. And so it's the first brewing method, which means the grounds are still left in the cup. And when you finish the liquid, the grounds settle to the bottom. You turn your cup over onto its saucer, and the grounds create lines on the side of the cup. Your fortune's then told from those lines. Now, my mom or me comes over, and we start to tell your fortune from the grounds. It's not something that you need to like create your life plan for, but it's a time for you to reflect and pause and think a little bit about the future. And it is also a way to give a lot of people hope. And especially during these uncertain times, this is something that a lot of people turn to. And what I noticed is that people want to share their stories, and people want to talk about their lives, and people want to share like what's deeply within them, but they just like are never really given the opportunity to take the time to talk to a stranger that they may never even see again about their stories. And I think what's so beautiful about this is that people become more vulnerable when they're talking maybe to a stranger that they may never see again, because they have less of a fear of being judged. But through this process, when you're sitting together and you're taking pictures of this fortune and you're posting it on social media, and then you're telling and sharing your story, it creates this, it amplifies the community building aspect, because digital platforms like Instagram allow each other to connect with people all over the world. And so what I want to also talk to you guys about is this social media brand building, this digital brand building. This is something I did at Procter & Gamble. This is something I'm doing at Ruya, and this is something that I'm also helping with other startups. Digital brand building is an art and a science. It is something where you have to take risks. It is something where you have to be authentic, and I roll my eyes at the word authentic because it's so overused, and I don't know if people even know what that means anymore, but honestly, to me, it's literally just not lying when someone asks, like, what's your passion? As I did, when I was first trying to sell myself to Procter & Gamble. And now I have this great privilege of not having to lie what my passion is. It's literally just me being a first American Turkish immigrant trying to be a positive voice for other immigrants in this country. And so what I want to say about digital brand building is being authentic. And what I think is the most crucial part is bringing people along for the journey. So building in public. A lot of other digital brand builders talked about this. Building in public, what does that mean? That means when I was building the shop, I showed people on Instagram when we got flooded. I showed them us taking over 48 hours to paint a wall, and it was my first time painting a wall of that size with a stencil, and like me messing up 10,000 times and having to repaint it. And so I think showing people your mess ups, showing people that you're authentic in those mess ups, and allowing people to understand that it is a process, and when you take people along for the process, they create a stronger connection to the brand. So building in public is one. The art and science I would say about digital brand building is also, how do you ride the wave of virality? So one example I like to give with this in Ruya is when we won a feature on Food Network, which was like our biggest media outlet at the time when it happened. I was like, what do I put? I like overthought my caption, and I was like thinking about what was happening at the time. At the time, Biden had just won the presidency, and there was this viral video of Kamala Harris calling Joe Biden, I don't know if you guys remember this, being like, Joe, we did it, Joe. And I was like, that's how I felt. Like I literally called my co-founder and I was like, Christopher, we did it, Christopher. And so we recreated that video, we posted that as the caption, And people were like, they totally immediately got it, because when you're on the platform, everyone was looking at that video of Kamala Harris like talking to Joe Biden about when they won the presidency. And I didn't win the presidency, I just won a feature on Food Network, but it literally felt like I won the presidency. So riding the wave of virality, there's all of these things where we think about brand equity and we put each other, like our brands in boxes. But sometimes I like to tell people, like, look at what's just happening on the platform and how do you insert your brand into that. Even if it doesn't necessarily make sense, your brand will benefit because other people are talking about it and it's a viral moment. So for example, another example is on Olay. Cat memes are huge on Instagram, but what does Olay skincare have to do with cat memes? It doesn't matter. We just created creative that had cat memes that had lasers shooting out of their eyes, and it was our best performing ad. So just to show, large corporations can also play into this, even if you're just doing something like Olay skincare. So building in public, being authentic, and then also I would say authentic storytelling, right? So the fortune-telling aspect, just to bring it all around, is the fact that people also want to share their stories, and people want to have their light shown on them. And so what I also want to bring back is the fact that Ruya is a positive voice for immigrants in America. And where that really stemmed from is reading narratives as I was growing up about two types of immigrants. There's one type of immigrant who's like the field worker, the low labor job, and the dishwasher. You know, people in America who might see that as, lower class work, but to an immigrant, that's a great opportunity, right? Especially when you look at the conversion rates for our currencies. And so that was one narrative that was convoluted by the media, and I think it also created a complicated relationship between America and immigrants. The second narrative that I saw was the super immigrant. So to me, the super immigrant that I looked up to was Hamdi, the founder of Chobani. This narrative is also interesting because it fuels people's dreams and it gives people hope, but then it also casts a shadow on if you are not achieving at that level, then are you not great? My parents worked multiple jobs to give me and my brother the life that we now have, and so was the fact that my mom worked at Panera while I was growing up as a second income not great? It's not the fact that she wasn't Hamdi, but I think there's also another shadow that's cast when you only look at the super immigrant narrative. So what we also want to do through Ruya and through the storytelling process is that there's greatness that lives within all of us, even if you're not a super immigrant. And so what I want to say is that storytelling connects all humanity, regardless of what country you're from, what politics you abide to, what religion you are. And at least that is the good news, and that is the good headline that we can put out. Thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome. Okay. Thank you. That was really wonderful, Melis. I really enjoyed hearing about Ruya Coffee and all of your great thoughts about human connection and authenticity. And now we will have a word from one of our StartupCincy Week sponsors, Verizon.
When the revolution come knocking at my door, I ain't fighting just for myself no more. Got my brothers by my side, and on the wings of freedom we ride. When the revolution come knocking at my door.
At Verizon, we are committed to supporting small business. We provided grants to help owners navigate through the pandemic. And now we're pledging to support 1 million businesses nationwide, helping them bring their businesses online so they can thrive in a digital economy. We create the networks that move the world forward for all, because we believe no one should be left behind.
Thank you all for sharing your unique perspective and highlights on how to leverage your brand. Thank you to Main Street Ventures for sponsoring this morning's Content Burst. And now I'm going to introduce our next session. To end the Recreate focus this morning, let me introduce our next panel. You may have the next big idea, but how do you go about making it a reality? When do you take the leap into entrepreneurship? Hear from some of our female founders on how they took their idea, pivoted, and turned it into a viable business in this panel. Reestablish female-founded startups. Let me turn it over to Kelly Bonnell, Executive Director of Main Street Ventures and co-moderator of this panel, to introduce this great group of founders.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so excited to be here for StartupCincy Week. Thank you, ladies, for being here as well, because as we all know, your time as entrepreneurs especially is just cut so, it's slim. So really appreciate you guys being here. And so I am Kelly Bonnell. My name, that is my name. I am with Main Street Ventures. What day is it? I am currently the executive director for Main Street Ventures. We are an organization that exists within the StartupCincy ecosystem to empower the next generation of entrepreneurs. And we do that in the form of equity-free funding. So actually all three of you are former grant recipients, so couldn't be more thrilled to have you here. And I'm so excited to have Nancy Eichholz with me as well. And Nancy, I'll pass it to you so I don't speak for you. You can introduce yourself.
You could probably do a better job. I'm Nancy Eichholz. I'm the president and CEO of Aviator Accelerators, and we exist to empower female founders in every industry at all stages of their business cycle. Emily is a very recent former flight night winner from Aviator, so I'm really excited to introduce the rest of the panel and I'm going to have you introduce yourselves, because if I go on, I will go on forever because I know a lot about your first two, and I'm dying to learn more about Tamia. So, Emily?
Yes, I just also want to say how honored I am to be up here with these incredible women. I'm Emily Bruns. I am co-founder of Eclipse Camper Vans. We provide a unique travel experience by renting camper vans that are custom built and thoughtfully designed for first-time campers to lifelong adventurers. We hope to help people connect with nature, themselves, and others.
Awesome. Thanks for having me as well. I'm Abby McInturf, co-founder of Band Connect. We're a care delivery platform that extends the in-clinic musculoskeletal rehabilitation experience into the patient's home via asynchronous virtual care. So we're providing a simple, portable, cost-effective, and cameraless solution to help empower patients at home to treat their musculoskeletal conditions.
Everybody's so impressive. I'm Tamia Stinson. I'm the founder of Tether, which is a community and network that connects the local image makers. So typically we're talking about photographers, videographers, hairstylists, wardrobe stylists, which is what my background is in. And the idea is to connect that community of people with the larger business community so that we can all work together and form an ecosystem that allows everybody to be successful.
Thank you. I mean, talk about the diversity in terms of business ideas here, ladies. I mean, this is such an incredible panel to have. I'm so excited for everyone to hear from you. And so how we're going to structure this panel is we have a few questions that we'll go back and forth asking just to really kind of get at your entrepreneurial journey, sharing your insights and wisdom, especially as female founders, and the different challenges and opportunities too that we have as female founders. So I'll kick it off first with the question about how did you realize that there was a problem you wanted to solve, right? Because all of the businesses that we have, all of our ideas start with this idea or this recognition of a problem. So to me, I'll start with you, if you don't mind, about tell us a little bit about how you knew that there was a problem.
Sure, I got the mic, why not? So like I mentioned, I have a background in wardrobe styling, and there were a couple things that sort of triggered this idea for me. One of them was that I noticed that a lot of my peers and people that I was working with were leaving Cincinnati. They were going to Chicago or LA or New York because they felt like there was more opportunity there. But in reality, we have a number of Fortune 500 companies just within a 1-mile radius of where we're sitting right now. So I thought, okay, there has to be a way to connect these two communities so that we can all work together. And then also, as a wardrobe stylist, I kind of got out of the business, but I would still get people who wanted to work with me, which is super, obviously, very honored. But if I wasn't available or didn't have time, then I was like, well, how can we make it easier for people to reach out to each other and connect so that we can all collaborate? So that was basically where the idea came from.
Awesome. Abby, yeah.
Yeah, I can go next. So my experience was I haven't met anyone that has had a good experience in physical therapy. If you have, come talk to me. But the reality is that 70% of patients' total treatment is at home, and physical therapists don't have the ability to engage with patients when they're not in the clinic. Instead, they're given sheets of paper handouts with stick figure drawings, and patients are oftentimes unmotivated or they lose their sheets of paper, which results in only 35% of patients complying with their plans of care. And to me, the more I've digged into it, like, it's an extremely archaic process. And just hearing everyone's personal stories as I've gone through this journey is kind of what motivates me to keep going.
Emily, what about you?
Yeah, so we didn't invent camper vans, obviously, but I was lucky enough to take a trip to Iceland with my husband, and we rented a camper van there. We love the idea of being able to travel around the island and sort of with a lot of freedom. When we had the camper van, we were like, oh, this is so convenient, everything we need. All of the stuff is sort of packed away, but it was just basically a van and a platform bed, and that sort of got, the wheels turning, thinking about how could I do this better. And we needed something like this in the Midwest because there's so many places to visit and great opportunities to be outdoors. And so, yeah, there was definitely a hole here in the Midwest that we felt like needed to be filled.
So hang on to the mic. We'll just stay in order. So the next question, Emily, is, so taking that idea, how did you know, or when did you know, I guess, that your idea was worth turning into a business?
I think we had been doing it sort of as a side hustle for about a year, and I was working a full-time job, and as well as my other co-founder, Sophia, and it was gaining traction. We hadn't really done any advertising or really put the word out much, but people were able to find us, and they were renting. So I feel like a little bit, 6 months into, about a year into it, we just kind of felt like, man, we could really take this to the next level, jumping in full-time. So. I guess about a year, and then the pandemic hit, and it was a great way to travel. It was a safe way to travel. So that kind of like blew things up, and then we definitely decided to go full in.
Awesome, yeah. So I think for me, the moment was when I was doing some customer discovery and went into physical therapy clinics, and everyone, there was no like, oh, this won't work. It was everyone was on board, and that was across the board from physical therapists to surgeons to clinic managers. And I think that was really the opportunity because we just had a concept at that time, and these people we were talking to were willing to get on board and help us get into their clinics and start testing our platform. So I think that was kind of the moment where I was like, okay, this isn't just like an idea anymore. This is a problem that needs to be solved.
Cool. Yeah, I wish I had a concrete answer to that question. That would be fantastic if anyone has any ideas. I think I knew that it was a potential business when, similar to you, other people decided to get on board. I actually started the company or the organization with a fellowship from People's Liberty, and when I realized that their team, which has seen however many ideas come across their table, thought that it was good enough to award, I was like, okay, this sounds like a thing that could potentially work. And then, there's always that reinforcement that comes from talking to people on a regular basis. I just had a conversation with a lawyer who used to be a videographer last week, and he was super interested. He was like, I'm in a different business now, but this 100% sounds like something I could have used when I was in the business. So, every now and then, and I'm sure you guys can relate, you get those little moments of, okay, no, I'm actually going in the right direction.
A lawyer who used to be a videographer. That is a
That's
very
unusual,
unique
right?
skill set. No offense.
The
all
transition.
respect to lawyers. It's definitely using.
He must have done well during the Zoom era.
Right? Yes, yes. Let's talk about using both sides of your brain there. But actually, during the pandemic, it strikes me as you guys are all sharing your stories how great of an opportunity, but how terrifying it must have been during this past year, especially for Emily and Abby, you two starting during the middle of a pandemic or right before a pandemic, and Tamia, you charging through it. So this next question is probably really even still relevant in your face, I would imagine. But talk about what risks you faced bringing this idea to life. Pandemic, obviously a huge one. But I'd love to hear a little bit more, and actually we'll start with Emily for this one, or Abby for this one.
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll take it back before the pandemic. So I think the risk for me was like getting on board and coming like full-time onto this project. So my background's in industrial design, and I graduated from UC's DAP program in 2018, and Band Connect started as one of my class projects. And it started as a concussion prevention tool, but when I graduated, I went through the UC Venture Lab program, and that's when we recognized a greater need in the physical therapy space. But I think it was that moment that was the biggest risk for me, because a lot of my peers were graduating and moving to the coast and getting these jobs at consultancies where industrial design jobs are more prevalent. And I felt that taking this risk was questionable at the time, but I'm so glad that I did it. But I feel like that decision was hard for me, just seeing everyone kind of get that tangible win right off the bat, where it took me a lot longer to get there.
Awesome. Emily, well, that'll be weird with the mic, but we'll work with it. We'll deal with it.
So I think initially when we started, Sophia and I thought, well, when we were building out our first van, like, what's the worst that can happen? Nobody rents our van, and we get to use it. So we were like, yeah, for sure, this is not a problem. But as we decided to make the leap into me going full time, this was right before the pandemic and kind of a little bit in the pandemic. And I was a full-time teacher, health insurance, all of those wonderful things that come with a steady full-time job. But I just, I think you listen to your gut, and you have people who are coming and wanting your service. And I think I felt like it might have on the outside seemed like a big risk, but like I just had the confidence and felt like I was doing the right thing. So in a way, it didn't really seem like a huge risk.
Yeah, I would say the risk is always failure, right? So thinking about, am I wasting my time? For me, it was, am I wasting these people's money? What other opportunities could I be taking advantage of instead of doing this right now? So there's always that risk. But I think, to your point, you kind of have to trust your gut and go with where your gut and your heart is leading you at the moment. And that's typically the right direction to go in.
Awesome.
So one of the things we talk about a lot in aviator world is funding for women. And we all know that we just have different challenges, and that we still have a very long way to go. There are some really sort of scary stats if you really look at the stats, so you have to sort of forget that and just go for it. But I was wondering, what kind of funding have you accessed, and what challenges did you face when you were accessing that funding? And let's see, why don't we start with Tamia, since you've got the mic, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, well, like I mentioned, I got a fellowship grant through People's Liberty to initially get Tether off the ground, which was extremely helpful. So the funding itself was not so much of an issue as how to reasonably, responsibly spend the money in a way that I didn't feel guilty about. I felt like I was actually doing what needed to be done versus just sort of, testing things out. So there was a lot of, I think, internal pressure for me on, this is how you should be spending it, this is how much. I kept a very close eye on the budget, still do. Same with the funding that I've received from Main Street Ventures. So while most of my funding has been through grants, there is a lot of, again, personal pressure that I put on myself probably to ensure that that money is spent responsibly.
Yeah, so for me, I mentioned that I went through the Venture Lab program. I was incredibly fortunate to get grant funding through the Venture Labs, which allowed us to take the medical device orientation with our platform. So that kind of really helped get our product development started and validate our solution. Since then, we've gotten a grant from Main Street Ventures to help with some IP activities. And we're actually going through a pre-seed funding round right now. So that has been a huge learning experience for me, given that all of our previous funding has been from grant funding opportunities. So really excited about that. We're raising a $500,000 round that we're hoping to close here soon.
So we started off self-funded. Sophia and I, we took our credit as far as we could, purchasing 6 vehicles. And then we were lucky enough to get connected with Nancy and Aviatra, and we were able to receive a grant through our pitch and pitch night, and then we were able to get a grant from Main Street Ventures. So we're hoping that these things are going to take us to the next level. I believe that they are. But yeah, we started sort of bootstrapping it, and then started to reach out to other people.
Love that. Thank you for all the plugs for Main Street, by the way. Love this. Well, one thing that strikes me, though, as you guys are all speaking about this, too, is the support that you've all received from the ecosystem. And I love seeing that theme woven in here. So I'm going to add a question that I didn't prep you for, so apologies. But I'm just curious because I know a lot of entrepreneurs that we speak with, and Nancy, I'm sure you speak with too, don't necessarily know how to navigate the ecosystem. So Emily, since you have the mic and you talked about getting connected with Nancy and Aviatra, how did you go about that? How did you go about finding out that these resources exist?
Well, I think we first heard about Aviatra at Cincy Startup 2 years ago. Nice. And then we, yeah, so a plug for everyone here. And then we were just at a point in our business where we were really looking for some guidance, and we were able to come across the SCORE mentorship program, and then they sort of reintroduced us to Aviatra, and then luckily one thing has led to another, So yeah, it is hard, I think, and you do need support, but Cincinnati is there for you. I mean, I feel like when we've looked and researched, we've been able to find, and one person has connected us to the next person, so.
Awesome. Don't feel obligated, but I'd love to hear if you want to share.
Yeah, sure. So I got really lucky getting connected to the Venture Labs because when I was presenting my project in school, someone from the Venture Labs was there. So that's kind of the luck of my journey. And then the Venture Labs connected us to a lot within the ecosystem, one of which was Main Street. And then when we got the Main Street Ventures grant, we got connected to Generator's G-Beta program. And so that was a really good experience to kind of kick off our more serious involvement in the Cincinnati ecosystem outside of UC. So I think it's been kind of this funnel, keep going and meeting more people, but I feel like everyone within that ecosystem has been so incredibly supportive of me as a female founder, which is really exciting to see.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I will say, well, number one, I'm really nosy. So if there is something going on, then I want to know about it. And I'm really good at Googling. I've always loved research. But like you guys were saying, kind of once you talk to one person, they will lead you to the next, and that person will lead you to the next. It's kind of like falling down the Wikipedia rabbit hole. And Cincinnati tends to be a really supportive city. If people see you trying to do something, for the most part, there are no more than, I don't know, like 3 or 4 degrees of separation between anybody here. So if they see you trying to do something, then they are super happy to connect you with somebody else who might be able to help you get further.
I love that. I couldn't agree with that more. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that those answers with that unplanned question. Now back to the regularly scheduled questioning. So what have been some of your biggest learnings so far? And Tamia, we can go right back to you since you have the mic, and I'll make it easy.
Sure. Biggest learnings. You can do more than you think you can. So I am typically somebody who likes to think things through 100% all the way. You don't always have time for that as an entrepreneur. That's just not always possible. But, you can figure things out on the spot or do what you can in, I don't know, the 10 minutes you have between meetings when it's necessary. So the biggest thing for me has been just believe you can get it done, and you will.
I think for me, it's things take a lot longer than you think. So I think you hear about all these startup stories and you don't appreciate how long it takes to get there. So I think I've learned to appreciate the journey and where you are, but definitely did not expect things to kind of take this long, especially starting a business out of school.
I feel like, when am I not learning? I feel like this being, our
Spoken
first.
like a true teacher.
Yeah, I feel like being an entrepreneur and starting a business is like a school of learning. So I don't think that I can pinpoint, one particular thing. I think I've learned a lot about myself. That's I guess like the biggest learning, but you're constantly learning.
Yeah, agree.
So, part of the purpose of this whole week is to inspire other entrepreneurs and all learn from each other. So, what advice would you give to other entrepreneurs out there, especially other women, who might be kind of teetering on that brink of going full time and taking the plunge versus having a side hustle?
I think, like we kind of discussed, listening to your gut, I think, is the most important thing, and not letting fear prevent you from making bold moves. I think you have to make bold moves, and you can be afraid, but you can't let that get in the way.
Yeah, so I would, I totally just blanked what I was going to say. I'll let you go and then I'll come back to me. Sorry.
Okay, I'll try to say something that triggers whatever was in your mind before. So I completely agree. Don't let fear hold you back. And I'm going to go ahead and keep it real. I got married a little earlier this year, and I don't know that I would have been able to do the full-time thing without having that support when it comes to things like health insurance and ensuring there's a roof over my head and food on the table. So, not to make it sound like you have to depend on a man. Ladies, you don't need no man. But making sure that you have those things in place will free up a lot of your brain space and emotional capacity to ensure that you can dedicate what you need to dedicate to your business.
Okay, it did spark, so we're good. So I would say that I've learned more in the past 3 years than I ever imagined that I would, and I think I've learned more than I would have going a different route. And so I think that even if you do fail, you still learn so much more, and it's totally worth it.
Thank you guys so much, ladies, so much. Are there any last parting words you'd like to share with the audience? Anything, that we haven't asked you today that you feel you want to get out there?
I guess I'll start. I would just like to thank everyone at StartupCincy Week. I think it's a great opportunity for young founders who are interested in maybe taking that leap or have already taken that leap to meet people within the ecosystem. I know that I've attended all of the years that I've been on this journey, and so I think it's a great way to kind of get the community together, especially in the pandemic world when it's nice to be here when we're not on Zoom. So, yeah.
Yeah, we're 3D. We all actually exist in 3D life. There's dimension to us.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
I would say the same thing that I pretty much say to anybody that comes to me with a question, and that is, if you have an idea or you're trying to do something, just put it out there. One of the things that I find when I talk to people is they have these fantastic ideas in their brains, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds amazing. Go for it. What are you doing? Who are you telling? They're like, oh, I haven't told anybody yet. Put it out there. You never know. That's the product market research portion of the program that can be super helpful.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I would just kind of absolutely agree with both of what you said. But I think that once you put it out there, I think then you can kind of sort of get a feel, and you start to get these signs from the universe. And so just keep listening and look for those pieces of confirmation, and they come in all different ways and all different times. And when you really do least expect it, and just do it. Put yourself out there. It's worth it.
Lean in. Love it.
Yeah.
Nancy, anything you want to share? Put you on the spot.
Right. No, I'm just so impressed with all three of you. And, I think you've all kind of said it different ways, but sometimes you just have to throw it on the wall and see if it sticks. You can't overthink it, but you also have to mitigate those risks. And I think you've all done a really great job of taking some big risks, but calculated risks. Because many times as young entrepreneurs, we are spending other people's money. And we do feel a real sense of obligation, and that's important, and that needs to be, that's a valid concern. So, but I just love that you have just done it, and that you continue to do it, and that you all three are continually reaching out for help, because there will never be a point in our journey as entrepreneurs where we don't need somebody else's help. And you will have the opportunity to help other people. And I know that you all have already, when people have asked you for help, you've given help. So I think that's how it all works. And I just think this is great fun, and we could talk all day. So sorry, everybody else.
No, I love that. Somebody asked me here recently, what I believe the top 3 traits of entrepreneurs are. And as Nancy said, one that I think is often forgotten is don't silo yourself, meaning you can help others. You're not competing against each other, and that's one thing I think that's great about the startup ecosystem as a whole, but especially you 3 ladies, knowing you personally. You have definitely wanted to help and give back, and you're doing it today. So cannot thank you all enough for your insights. I'm so certain that there were more than a few entrepreneurs out there inspired by what you guys said today and what you shared. So I can't thank you all enough again for being here. So these women are incredible, and I'm sure by the end of this panel session now that most of you, all of you will agree with that. So I hope you leave today's session a little bit more motivated than you were before. And thank you so much for being with us today and these ladies, and have a great rest of Startup Week.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, ladies. I'm definitely feeling more motivated and inspired. Thank you. Your stories were just amazing, and it was really interesting and very compelling to hear from each of you. So thank you so much. So thank you for joining us for the Recreate Burst for StartupCincy Week 2021. Thank you to Main Street Ventures for sponsoring today's content. This morning we focused on creativity, innovation, and marketing, and how to win the game of innovation, listening to marketing experts inspire us to leverage your brand, and we talked with some of our region's female founders on how they brought their ideas to life. Don't forget to join us this afternoon to hear about innovation opportunities in the city of Cincinnati and how to accelerate growth in your business. To end this morning, I would like to introduce a spoken word video by Whitney Coble. Thank you again for attending StartupCincy Week, and we look forward to seeing you all this afternoon.
Today is titled An Ode to the Innovator. Before the birds awake at dawn to sing their morning glory, with matters of the day in focus, heart and mind grounded, you have risen. About time the sun bats its radiant eyes and kisses earth with warmth, you have already driven to the brick and mortar that houses the hopes, the dreams, and the ambitions of your futures. Forged in valor, fear not, for this is who you are. The pioneers, the storytellers, daring women cultivating the creativity that sculpts our society. You are the torches that ignite hidden trails, that set bellies ablaze. You've accepted a call, dug your dues deep, and yet at times deny yourself the moment to bask in your own glory. Here, at this time, know that your day has come to embark upon territories unknown. May the howling of the hustle continue to hum within the hollow of your chest. Go forth and carry out your days fiercely, for you are the true embodiments of tenacity, grace, resilience, and most importantly, innovation. Thank you.